I raised my son for 35 years, fed him, sheltered him, loved him. But one night I heard him whisper to his wife, "Just be patient. That old woman's gonna die soon. Then the house is ours." I didn't die. I disappeared, and I took everything with me. If you think this is just another family drama, then you're dead wrong. Subscribe now because stories like this are just getting started. The morning fog was still thick across the hills of Ashridge, Oregon. Grace Layton stood barefoot in the quiet kitchen of the villa she'd helped buy, though no one ever said it that way aloud. She wore a soft gray cardigan buttoned neatly down the front and a silk scarf tucked at her collar. At 65, her movements were deliberate, practiced. She diced papaya for a fruit bowl, arranged each piece with the same care she once reserved for boardroom contracts. The house was large, open plan, filled with modern art and muted luxury. Granite counters, high ceilings, polished oak floors. Vanessa had chosen every detail herself. Grace had paid for most of it quietly, gradually, under the vague family understanding that this home was shared. In truth, she owned it. The deed was in her name, but she'd stopped correcting people years ago. A door upstairs slammed. Grace flinched just slightly, then composed herself. Daniel came downstairs, eyes glued to his phone gym bag slung across one shoulder. "Morning, Mom," he said absently, brushing past the kitchen without waiting for a reply. "You want breakfast?" Grace asked softly. "Nah, Vanessa's ordering smoothies." And he was gone out the door into his Lexus, into his day. Grace stood in the center of the kitchen, holding a clean dish towel between her hands, twisting it gently. That was the thing about indifference. It didn't shout. It didn't strike. It simply passed you like a breeze that didn't know your name. Upstairs, a hairdryer roared behind the closed master suite door. Vanessa was awake. Grace turned back to her fruit bowl, wrapped it in plastic, and placed it carefully in the fridge. She moved through the house like she always did, tidying small things no one would notice, resetting the throw pillows, straightening the family photo on the wall, the one where she stood off to the side like an extra in someone else's life. The photo was from 2 years ago. Daniel in a navy suit, Vanessa glowing in white, their son Alex grinning in suspenders, and her Grace smiling politely like someone grateful to be included. She'd paid for that photo session, of course. She headed back to her own bedroom, the mother-in-law suite, as Vanessa called it during the remodel. It was on the first floor near the garage. "So Mom doesn't have to deal with stairs," Daniel had said, his tone light, rehearsed, as if he was doing her a kindness. It was a lovely room, spacious, quiet, separate. Grace sat at the writing desk by the window, opened her notebook, and checked the bills. She still handled them all: property taxes, utilities, insurance, school fees for Alex's private academy, the bi-weekly cleaning service. No one asked. She just paid. That's what mothers do. On her desk sat a thick file folder labeled Household Expenses. She kept every receipt, every transfer record. Not because she expected thanks, but because she still needed proof that she mattered. She stared at the spreadsheet. Nearly $14,000 spent in the last 3 months. New countertops, therapy sessions for Alex, monthly HOA dues, a surprise weekend spa retreat Vanessa had absolutely needed after a stressful deal fell through. Grace sighed, folded the spreadsheet, and tucked it back into the folder. She never said no, not once. In the hallway, Vanessa's heels clicked down the stairs like clock hands. "Morning, Grace," she said crisply, pausing only long enough to adjust her Chanel bag strap. "Oh, don't forget the dry cleaning pickup." "I left the tags in the laundry room. I'll take care of it." "Thanks." Vanessa smiled, a quick flash of lipstick and teeth. "You're a lifesaver." Then she was gone, just like that. Grace stood there a moment longer. That phrase lingered. You're a lifesaver. So easy to say, so impossible to prove. Later, while watering the orchids in the sunroom, she overheard Vanessa on a phone call through the ajar sliding door. "She still pays for everything. Honestly, I don't even have to remind her. She just does it. It's like clockwork. Like, I don't know, a habit she can't break." There was a pause. "No, I mean, we're lucky, right? It's like having a live-in sponsor. No strings attached. Weird, right?" Grace froze, watering can tipping slightly in her hand. I mean, if it were my mom, I'd at least ask for something back. But Grace, she just keeps giving. Guilt, I guess. That generation has a thing for it. A quiet chuckle followed. Not cruel, just casual. Like she was a background character. A trust fund, a symbol. Grace placed the watering can down slowly, deliberately. One of the orchids drooped just slightly, a petal curling under the weight of its own bloom. That afternoon she folded laundry in silence. Later she set the dinner table. No one showed up for dinner. At 8:34 p.m. a message from Daniel arrived. Vanessa had a last-minute work thing. We grabbed something on the way. Don't wait up. No apology, no acknowledgement. Grace sat alone at the table, staring at the untouched place settings. The candles flickered. The soup had gone cold. She looked at the empty chairs across from her and thought not for the first time what would happen if she simply disappeared. Would anyone notice? Would they miss her? Or just the part of her that paid the bills? The part that never asked for anything back? In the stillness of the villa, Grace felt something shift, not loudly, not all at once, but like the quiet snap of a seam pulled too tight for too long. And for the first time in years she wondered what it might feel like to stop being needed and start being free. The rain had started in the early evening, a soft drizzle at first, then gradually turning heavy, the kind that blanketed Ashridge Hills in a curtain of cold gray. The windows of the Leighton villa glistened with streaks of water, the lights inside glowing faintly through the downpour like a lantern in fog. It was a night that invited silence, the kind of weather that makes people draw closer around fireplaces, share wine and stories, talk about nothing and everything. But not in this house. Grace sat alone in the library, an untouched mug of chamomile tea cooling beside her on a stack of old gardening magazines. She had been reading the same page for almost an hour, her mind circling the same questions she never asked out loud. Am I truly a part of this family? Or just a fixture in their convenience? A clap of thunder rumbled low in the distance, and she glanced toward the hallway. The upstairs lights were still on. She could hear footsteps, faint voices, Daniel and Vanessa in their room. Normally she'd leave them their space, but tonight something made her stand. She wasn't eavesdropping, she told herself. She was just walking to the laundry room. She had every right to be in her own home. The hallway was dimly lit. She padded quietly across the floor in her soft house slippers, paused near the foot of the staircase just under the balcony landing, where voices echoed faintly above. I'm just saying, Vanessa's voice floated down sharp and fast. We've been waiting for years. This house is practically ours already. We've remodeled, we pay the taxes. Grace frowned. That wasn't true. She paid the taxes, every quarter, on time, quietly. Daniel answered, voice lower, lazier. Yeah, but technically it's still under her name. The deed, the accounts, everything. Which is ridiculous. Vanessa's voice grew harder. She barely uses any of this. She's got her little suite downstairs like a paid guest in a boutique hotel. If she weren't so traditional, she'd have signed everything over already. Daniel sighed. She will, eventually. A pause. Then Vanessa's words landed like a blade in Grace's chest. Eventually, Dan, when she dies, the house is legally ours. Just a matter of time. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can pretend to care. It's exhausting. Daniel let out a chuckle. Babe, come on. No, I mean it. I feel like I'm tiptoeing all the time. One wrong word and she'll go all mother martyr on us. But if we just stay patient, keep her comfortable, she'll pass peacefully and everything will be sorted. So what you're saying, we just wait her out? Exactly. A few more years tops. We've come this far. Might as well finish the game. Grace didn't breathe. Her hand reached out to the banister to steady herself. Her son was quiet for a long moment before muttering, Jesus, Vanessa. She laughed lightly. You know I'm right. I always am. They both laughed, then soft, intimate, like it was an inside joke they'd rehearsed before. Grace turned away, her legs moving without direction, carrying her back through the dark hallway past the kitchen into her bedroom. She closed the door without a sound, leaned back against it, and stared into the silence. The words echoed inside her skull like nails in a jar. When she dies, the house is ours. Just wait her out. Might as well finish the game. She sank into the armchair near her window. Outside, the rain came down in sheets, now dancing across the tiles like fingers tapping an unplayed piano. Thunder groaned again, but she didn't flinch. She stared blankly at the orchid on her windowsill, the one she had nursed back to life after Vanessa almost tossed it for being too droopy. It bloomed twice a year now, reliable, like her. The illusion shattered. For years, she'd told herself that love didn't need to be loud, that sacrifice was just another word for family. She believed silence was strength, that her role was to support, not to question. But tonight she saw it clearly. They were waiting for her to die, not in anger, not in some fit of cruelty, inconvenience. They had built a timeline around her expiration date. Grace stood. Her knees ached slightly from sitting too long, but she moved toward her desk, opened the drawer with her files. She found the deed to the house neatly folded in its envelope. She had paid for every inch of it. The down payment had come from the sale of her company, the renovations, her retirement fund, the school tuition, the trust James had left for their future grandchildren. All of it, hers. And still they waited. She thought of James then. Her late husband had been a quiet man but firm. He used to tell her, "Grace, don't let love turn you into a doormat. There's no dignity in being stepped on." She hadn't listened. She thought motherhood required a softer kind of strength. Tonight she felt like a ghost haunting her own generosity. She moved to the bathroom, turned on the light, and stared into the mirror. The reflection looked back at her with hollow eyes. She was still graceful, still elegant, but there was something cracked behind her gaze. Not broken, but splintered. Like stained glass no one bothered to restore. She touched the corner of her mouth, no tears, not yet. Grief didn't come in sobs. It arrived in silence, in the realization that the people you loved had built an exit plan, and you were the obstacle. She opened the medicine cabinet. Bottles lined the shelf. Blood pressure, calcium, vitamins, sleeping aids. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would ever qualify her for sympathy. She stared at her reflection, unsure if the woman looking back was weak or simply tired. The thunder rolled again, closer now, vibrating through the floorboards. The clock on the wall ticked. Grace didn't move. She just stood there, watching herself, like she was waiting to see what kind of woman she would become next. Someone's mother, or just a name on a deed. The seconds passed. The rain fell. And Grace, for the first time in a decade, felt absolutely painfully awake. The morning after the storm, Ashridge Hills wore a veil of cold light and wet leaves. The rain had stopped just before dawn, but the street still glistened as if the sky had wept all night and fallen asleep on the pavement. Inside the villa, Grace moved differently now. Not slower, quieter. There was an invisible tension in her shoulders, a gravity behind her eyes that hadn't been there the day before. She still made breakfast, still straightened the pillows, still refilled the fruit bowl with fresh oranges and pears. But now she wasn't just maintaining the home. She was watching it, taking stock, calculating its weight not in square footage but in betrayal. By 9:30 a.m., the house was empty. Daniel had gone to work Vanessa to her Pilates class. The silence was almost generous. Grace took a deep breath and opened the top drawer of her desk. The old leather-bound planner lay exactly where it always did, tucked beside a manila folder titled Emergency Contacts. She flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. The contact card for Michael Whitaker, their family attorney for over 20 years. James had trusted him implicitly. She hesitated only a moment before dialing. Whitaker Law, a soft voice answered. "Hi, this is Grace Layton. I'd like to schedule an appointment with Michael. Urgent but discreet." "Of course, Mrs. Layton. He has an opening today at noon. Would that work?" She glanced at the clock. "Yes, and please don't confirm the appointment with anyone else." "Understood." Click. She exhaled slowly. Then she changed her clothes. Nothing dramatic. Just a smart navy coat, simple flats, and a silk scarf. Dressed not as someone in mourning, but as someone who had returned to herself. At 10:15, she walked into Ashridge First National Bank and smiled at the teller she'd known for over a decade. "Good morning, Grace," the woman chirped before catching the unusual look in Grace's eyes. "Everything all right?" "I need to meet with the manager," Grace said politely. "Privately, please." The teller blinked. "Of course." 5 minutes later, she was seated in a quiet office with soft jazz playing faintly through a ceiling speaker. A young man in a fitted suit, Reynolds, his name tag said, welcomed her with the kind of smile you reserve for longtime clients with legacy portfolios. "What can we do for you today, Mrs. Layton?" "I'd like to liquidate a number of investments," Grace said calmly. "Everything currently tied to Layton Family Holdings and Layton Residual Trust. Close all automated transfers, effective immediately." Reynolds blinked. "That's a significant change. Would you like to walk through the details of why?" "No." The young man straightened slightly. "Of course. May I ask where the funds will be redirected?" "To an external account," Grace said. "In my name only." He hesitated again, clearly unsure whether to press. "We'll need additional verification steps for a full withdrawal of this scale." "You'll have them," Grace replied, "before the hour ends." Reynolds nodded, then stepped out of the room to begin the process. Grace leaned back in the chair. Her reflection stared back at her from the black surface of his dormant monitor. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger. This was about leaving no trace of herself where she wasn't wanted. By 11:10, she walked out of the bank with a folder of documents, a receipt for transfer initiation, and a cashier's check that bore a number Daniel and Vanessa would never see. At 11:45, she arrived at the Whitaker and Goldstein office. The receptionist ushered her straight in. Michael Whitaker was grayer now, but sharp as ever. His tie was crooked, his desk spotless. He stood when she entered, his eyes immediately scanning her face. "Grace, it's been a while." "Too long," she replied. He gestured to the chair across from him. "James would have said, if you're here without Daniel, it must be serious." She smiled thinly. "It is." He nodded. "Tell me everything." She did. Not the details of last night, not word for word, but the shape of it, the tone, the hollowness it left inside her. She told him about the years of invisible giving, of being thanked like an ATM only when it worked. She described the weight of betrayal not as a single blow, but as 1,000 little ones that had finally pierced the heart. Michael listened silently. When she finished, he said only, "What do you want to do?" "I want to write a new will," she said. He nodded, unsurprised. "And the contents?" "Everything goes to the Hopewell Scholars Fund." Michael looked up. "The education nonprofit. I founded it years ago anonymously," she said. "James knew. No one else did." Michael considered this. "You want the entire estate to go to them?" "Yes. The house, the accounts, the investments, everything." "And Daniel?" She shook her head. "Not a dime." He raised an eyebrow. "You know that will create pushback." "I'm not worried," she replied. "There's nothing they can claim that isn't in my name, and if they contest, they'll lose." Michael leaned back in his chair. "I can put a protective clause on the transfer of the property, something that ensures it can't be reversed or sold off quickly." "I want that." "And what about now?" he asked. "The house. I want it transferred to the nonprofit within 30 days. He tilted his head. "That's very fast." Grace met his eyes. "They think I'm just a name on a deed. I want them to know how wrong they were and how final that mistake is." Michael nodded. "All right. I'll prepare the documents." "There's one more thing," Grace added. "I need a letter notarized today." "From you?" She hesitated, then reached into her purse and handed him a single page, neatly written in pen. Michael took it, reading slowly. Then he stopped, eyebrows slightly raised. "If I'm just a name on your inheritance," the letter read, "then let silence be my answer. Let absence speak what I never dared say, and let the weight of what could have been rest where it belongs with the ones who waited instead of loved." Michael looked up. "Grace, I'm not trying to hurt them," she said, "but I refuse to be mourned by people who only miss my money." He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope. "I'll file the letter with the will." By 1:30 p.m. it was done, a plan born not from impulse but from clarity. She didn't go home right away. She stopped by a cafe near Willow Creek, ordered a black coffee, sat by the window, watched people walk by. She had signed away millions. She had rewritten the map of her legacy. She had disappeared from her own family's future. And somehow, for the first time in years, she felt light, unburdened, not by what she had lost, but by what she'd taken back. Her name, her voice, her choice. It began with an envelope. A plain ivory envelope with no return address, no ornate monogram, no dramatic wax seal. Just a name. Daniel. Written in Grace Layton's signature, precise, cursive, steady, elegant, unmistakable. Daniel found it on the kitchen island 3 days after his mother had vanished. The night she left, neither he nor Vanessa had noticed anything unusual. She hadn't said goodbye, hadn't turned off the porch lights, hadn't asked if they'd be home for dinner, and they didn't think to ask. They were both late getting home from a networking event at the Westview Country Club. Vanessa had complained about the appetizer selection. Daniel had drunk too much scotch. By the time they stumbled in, the house was quiet, dark, and empty. They assumed Grace had already gone to bed. The next morning she wasn't at the breakfast table, or in her room, or in the garden. Maybe she went to the market, Vanessa said, already scrolling through emails, or took a walk. You know how she likes those. But that night Grace still hadn't returned. By day 3 the silence had teeth. That's when Daniel found the envelope. It sat beside a bowl of overripe bananas and a half-used candle that had melted down to its wick. His name looked so still on the front, like it had been waiting for him. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Daniel, I imagine you are wondering where I've gone. I've left. I've chosen to begin the final chapter of my life on my own terms. If I was only ever a name on a deed, let this be the end of the sentence. You won't find me, and you won't need to. Mom, no hysteria. No long-winded explanations. Just that a departure with the efficiency of a signature and the precision of a scalpel. Daniel stared at the paper, his hands growing damp. For a moment he thought maybe this was some twisted prank, a guilt maneuver, some game to scare him into being more attentive. Then he checked his bank app. 3 of their joint property tax accounts showed an error message. Access denied. Another account simply read, closed. Contact branch. He blinked, closed the app, reopened it. Same result. Vanessa was in the sunroom, slicing into a grapefruit, already wearing a white robe with gold piping. Hey, he said, voice dry. Did you make any changes to the household accounts? She looked up, startled. What? No, why? They're frozen or gone. Vanessa's fork clattered against the ceramic bowl. What do you mean, gone? Daniel showed her the screen. She took the phone, eyes narrowing, then began tapping rapidly. Where's the brokerage login? The family trust. Try it. She did. A pause, then invalid credentials. She entered again. Then she looked up at him. Daniel. What? Check the deed. That one sentence took the air out of the room. They rushed into the home office. Vanessa flung open the filing cabinet with more force than necessary, yanked out the real estate folder marked Leighton Ashridge Property. Inside was a copy of the deed. It had once clearly listed Grace as the owner of record. But there was a new stamp now. A legal emblem marked the bottom corner, Hopewell Scholars Foundation assignee of title. No, Vanessa whispered. No. Daniel stared at the paper. His jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He flipped to the back. The signature was dated just 4 days ago. Grace had signed over the house. Transferred full ownership. She gave it away, Daniel said, his voice hollow. To a nonprofit. Vanessa screeched. What nonprofit? Hopewell Scholars, he muttered, as if saying it aloud might make it make sense. Vanessa's eyes were wild now. This is theft. This is emotional blackmail. This is a damn betrayal. Daniel sat heavily in the desk chair. She didn't steal anything. It was hers. Vanessa turned to him, hair falling into her face. You said the house was practically ours. I said it would be eventually. Well, eventually just vanished, Daniel. There was silence. Then the panic began. They made phone calls. Dozens. To Grace's friends, to her doctor, to their lawyer, to her old assistant from her consulting firm. Nobody knew anything, or they weren't saying. She said she was going away for a while, one acquaintance said vaguely. Didn't say where. I haven't spoken to Grace in months, another muttered. Even Michael Whitaker's office refused to comment, citing client privacy. That's code for collusion, Vanessa snapped, slamming her phone down. That night, Daniel tore through Grace's room like a man looking for the corner of a disappearing act. He pulled books off shelves, opened drawers, rummaged through her jewelry box, upended her sewing kit. Nothing. No notes, no travel plans, no flight confirmations. Just a room stripped of presents. Even her orchid was gone. Vanessa stood in the doorway, arms crossed, staring at the shell of the woman they had never really seen. She planned this, she said softly. She's been planning this. Daniel didn't answer. In his mind, he saw his mother walking down the driveway, suitcase in hand, while they were too busy arguing over dinner reservations. He saw her loading boxes into the back of a cab while he was playing golf. He saw her walking through the gate alone without anyone looking back. and he realized for the first time in his life he didn't know what she wanted, or who she really was. He had assumed she would always be there, until she wasn't. "Where do you think she went?" he whispered. Vanessa didn't answer, because neither of them knew, and suddenly for the first time the house didn't feel like home. It felt like a crime scene, and the only thing missing was her. The morning light in Willow Bay was different. It wasn't filtered through double-glazed windows or softened by curtain sheers. It poured in freely, golden and full of salt air spilling across the small tiled floor of Grace Layton's new home. A rented cottage, modest but bright, perched just off the riverside promenade. The windows were always open here, and the breeze smelled like jasmine and paper. She stood barefoot in the narrow kitchen, stirring a pot of coffee over a small gas stove. It had taken her nearly 2 hours to unpack the bare essentials her first night here. Just the things she'd shipped ahead anonymously. 3 sets of clothes, a box of books, her favorite kettle, and the old brass keychain James had bought for her in Florence nearly 30 years ago. There were no family photos on the shelves, no heavy antique clocks, no silent piano in the living room waiting for children who never played it. This place didn't echo with anyone's absence. It simply existed, quiet and whole. Outside, the town was waking. Across the street, an old man unlocked the bicycle rental shack. Further down, a woman in a linen dress swept the front of her cafe, humming under her breath. Everything moved at a different pace here, unrushed like the river itself. Grace wrapped her hands around her cup, leaned on the doorframe, and watched the light catch on the rippling water. She had done it. She had disappeared, and she wasn't dead. That was the strange part, being so completely gone from a life yet more alive than she'd felt in years. The bookstore came to her almost by accident. She had passed it on her second day in town, a narrow storefront squeezed between a noodle shop and a cobbler's. The sign was faded, the paper lantern. The display window held a row of weathered poetry books, their covers sun-bleached and love to ruin. The inside smelled like cedar ink and time. It was for lease. No fancy listing, no online photos. Just a taped note on the door, looking for someone who loves stories. And silence. She called the number. The owner, a frail widow named Elsie, said she'd been praying someone would call. They met that afternoon. By evening, Grace had signed the paperwork. Now each morning she opened the shop herself. She swept the floors, organized the shelves, and wrote small handwritten notes to tuck inside the books. Kind words, quotes, sometimes just, "You found this book for a reason." Locals were curious, of course. A few tourists wandered in. Most left with secondhand novels and a look of quiet wonder. The shop was small, but it felt like sanctuary. One Tuesday afternoon, as she was reorganizing a shelf of biographies, the bell above the door rang. Grace looked up. The young man who stepped in couldn't have been more than 24. Lean, clean-shaven, wearing a simple button-up and jeans still creased at the knees. He had a careful kind of posture, like someone used to being noticed for the wrong reasons. He wandered a few steps, eyes scanning the spines. Then he paused in front of the philosophy section. Grace approached slowly. "Can I help you find something?" The young man turned startled, then smiled awkwardly. "Oh, hi. I'm just looking. You don't see Kierkegaard in most shops like this." She smiled faintly. "We carry the ones nobody else does." He nodded, ran a finger across the shelf. "That's a good motto. Are you a student?" "Sort of," he said. "I'm applying to grad school. I work at the tech repair shop 2 streets over. Reading keeps me sane." She studied him for a beat. "Well, I can't promise salvation, but I can offer tea." He blinked. "That's actually really nice, thank you." She led him to the little table at the back of the shop, poured tea into 2 mismatched cups. They sat in silence for a few minutes, sipping. Then he said, "This might sound strange, but have we met before?" Grace blinked. "I don't think so." He tilted his head. "You look familiar." She smiled. "I have one of those faces." "No. I mean," he paused, set down his cup. "You wouldn't happen to be connected to the Hopewell Scholars Fund, would you?" Her heart stuttered in her chest. He didn't notice. "I was a recipient," he went on quietly now. 3 years ago. The Layton Fellowship. That saved my life. I wouldn't be here without it." Grace set her cup down carefully. "What's your name?" "Ethan. Ethan Harper." The name caught in her throat. He smiled. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make things weird. No, she said, voice softer than she expected. You didn't. He looked at her again. Wait, are you? She raised a hand gently. It was anonymous for a reason, but yes, I founded the fund. Ethan's eyes widened. Seriously? She nodded. He sat back stunned. I can't believe I'm sitting across from you. I've written letters to the foundation thanking you. I always wondered why. Grace felt tears gathering at the corner of her vision, unbidden and warm. Ethan went on, his voice cracking just slightly. My mom died when I was 15. My dad disappeared. I bounced between shelters for a while. I thought I'd never get out. Then one day, I got this letter saying I'd been awarded a scholarship for kids who just needed one chance. That was the first time I thought maybe the world hadn't forgotten me. She stared at him, words caught behind her lips. I got a job. I got housing. I finished my BA while working nights. And now I'm applying to Columbia. He smiled, embarrassed. It's ambitious, I know. It's perfect, she whispered. He looked at her again, softer this time. Thank you. I mean it. Not just for me. For every kid who thinks no one sees them. Grace reached across the table, touched his hand, and for the first time in years, she felt something bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with obligation. It was purpose. Clean. Undeniable. She didn't need a portrait on the wall. She didn't need her name engraved on a plaque. She just needed to know that she had done something that mattered. Ethan stood to leave after another hour of conversation, promising to return the next day. Before he left, he turned at the door. Hey, he said, eyes bright. This shop, it's magic. She smiled. Only because people like you walk into it. He nodded, slipped through the door, and disappeared down the cobbled street. Grace stood alone again, but she wasn't lonely. Outside, the sun was setting over the river. And inside, something long buried in her, something tender and brave, was waking up again. The storm didn't come with thunder. This time it came in silence. A slow unraveling, an empty mailbox, a frozen login screen, a letter returned with no forwarding address. By the 4th week of Grace Layton's disappearance, Daniel and Vanessa had moved past confusion into full-scale panic. The house they once paraded as a trophy was now a museum of uncertainty, every room echoing with unanswered questions. Daniel hadn't slept properly in days. He sat at the kitchen counter, a stale bagel untouched beside him, his laptop open to a search window filled with queries like elderly missing person private search and can you reverse a property title transfer. He clicked on the last link again, even though he'd already read the page 3 times. The answer hadn't changed. No, you can't. Not when the transfer was clean, legally airtight, notarized and protected by a charitable trust with immunity clauses stacked 5 layers deep. Still, he tried. That same afternoon, Daniel made the call to a man whose name he'd gotten from a business associate, someone who handled discreet situations with family complications, a man named Brennan, ex-police, now private and expensive. She's my mother, Daniel said over the phone. She's disappeared. I need to find her. Brennan's voice was rough but calm. Any reason you didn't go to the actual police? Daniel hesitated. It's complicated. You think she's in danger? No, I think she left, intentionally. Pause. People don't just vanish, Mr. Layton. They relocate, strategically. Exactly, Daniel thought. I can pay, he added. Brennan didn't ask how much, just said, send me everything you know. Photos, patterns, travel history. Let me work. And just like that, the hunt began. Meanwhile, Vanessa had her own war to fight. She waited until Daniel left one morning, then slipped into his office, opened his filing cabinet, and pulled out the legal envelope she had hidden 3 days earlier, the one from the county recorder's office confirming the title transfer. The Hopewell Scholars Foundation was now the legal owner of their estate. She scanned the document for a loophole, a missing stamp, an error in process. Nothing. Her jaw tightened. She took out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used since her real estate days. Lydia Carrington, a partner at Whitaker & Goldstein, the same firm Grace had always trusted. Lydia, Vanessa began sweetly. It's Vanessa Layton. I need a legal consultation. Urgent. They met in a sleek frosted glass conference room downtown. Lydia wore a white blouse with a red silk scarf and the expression of someone who knew exactly how this would go. Vanessa, she said coolly. To be clear, I cannot discuss Grace's legal affairs. Attorney-client privilege. I'm not asking you to, Vanessa said, managing a tight smile. I just want to understand what options exist when an elder relative is manipulated into signing away her estate. Lydia blinked slowly. Are you suggesting coercion? I'm suggesting vulnerability, Vanessa said. She's isolated. Her mental state. She passed all competency evaluations at the time of the transfer. Lydia interrupted. We required them. Standard procedure for high-value estate changes. Vanessa's smile faltered. So there's no path to reversal, none that wouldn't result in a very public legal defeat. Lydia leaned forward. And if I may be frank, given your reputation, that's not a stage you want to be on. Vanessa sat back stunned. You're protecting her. No, Lydia said evenly. She protected herself. We just executed the documents. Vanessa left the building seething. Back in Ashridge Hills, the cracks began to widen. The property tax notices came first, not in their name. Then the second car lease bounced the luxury SUV Vanessa insisted on for client image. Her assistant whispered that the finance department had flagged an unpaid invoice. Vanessa laughed it off at the time, but that evening her corporate card was declined at a wine tasting. Daniel found her pacing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. No, there's no mistake. My name is on that account. What do you mean it was closed? She slammed the phone down. They shut the cards. Daniel rubbed his temples. Which cards? All of them. The joint trust ones, the travel account, the backup. He turned pale. What about the investment accounts? Gone, folded, liquidated and transferred. To where? To wherever the hell she is. He sat down hard. Jesus. Vanessa crossed her arms. This is your fault. What? You let her do this. You didn't watch her. You gave her too much access. She raised me, Vanessa. I trusted her. You let her walk out of this house with millions. Daniel stood. She didn't walk out with anything. She gave it away. Vanessa scoffed. To a bunch of strangers with college dreams? Please, that was a screw you move. Strategic. She's not vindictive. No, she snapped. She's just a ghost with a trust fund. He stared at her. Do you even hear yourself? Vanessa didn't answer. She turned away, shoulders tight. Daniel exhaled. Look, I'm doing what I can. I hired someone, a professional. Vanessa turned. A detective. He'll find her. And then what? Beg her to undo it. You think she'll listen? He didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. Brennan's emails started arriving in short bursts. Tracked phone signal to Ashridge Transit Depot. Bus ticket paid in cash, headed south. Next update, withdrawals from ATM in River Point. Then nothing. Then possible sighting in Willow Bay. Quiet coastal town. Off-grid. Daniel read the last email 3 times. Mouth dry. He clicked the image Brennan had attached, a grainy security shot of a woman in a bookstore, back turned, graying bun pinned tight. She looked peaceful. Too peaceful. He didn't forward it to Vanessa. That week the calls from their financial advisor intensified. You're going to need to restructure, he said delicately. I still have income, Daniel insisted. You do. But not enough to maintain 3 mortgages, 2 car leases, and Alex's private school tuition. Vanessa snapped. We are not pulling him out of Haven Hill Prep. There are options, the advisor said gently, but they'll require downsizing. Daniel hung up in silence. Vanessa turned on him. I am not giving up this house. It's not ours anymore, he said flatly. She glared. You're weak. He blinked. What did you say? You let her play you like a violin, she hissed. And now look at us scrambling like peasants. Daniel's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. That woman gave us everything. She paid your tuition. She bought this house. She raised our son while you were off networking. Vanessa's face twisted. She did it to control us, and it worked. No, he said, it didn't. She flinched, but only for a moment. That night, Daniel slept in the guest room. In the dark, he stared at the ceiling and saw his mother's face, not angry, not sad, just distant, like she had finally floated free of their gravity. The inheritance had vanished, but it was never really theirs to begin with. And now the life they thought was guaranteed was coming apart quietly, methodically, just like she had planned. And neither of them could stop it. The sky over Willow Bay was beginning to turn. What started as a clear morning had slipped into a restless afternoon, the light thick with humidity and the whisper of an approaching storm. Grace Layton stood behind the front counter of the paper lantern, gently dusting a stack of antique poetry collections, when the brass bell over the door gave a sharp, singular jingle. She looked up, expecting the usual a local librarian, a tourist with sand on their shoes, maybe Ethan dropping by early for their weekly tea. But it wasn't any of those. It was Daniel. He stood in the doorway, hair disheveled from travel shirt, clinging slightly from sweat, but still clinging to the illusion of composure. The briefcase in his hand betrayed him. It trembled. Grace's breath caught. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It had been nearly 6 weeks since she'd disappeared from Ashridge Hills. She had imagined this moment more than once, rehearsed it in quiet moments with her tea or her journal. But the reality of her son standing in the shop she'd built from silence felt unreal. She straightened her shoulders. "Daniel," she said. His smile was slow, artificial. "Hi, Mom. You found me." He stepped further inside, glancing at the bookshelves. "Wasn't easy. But you always like to disappear into stories." She didn't return the smile. "Why are you here?" "I just wanted to talk," he said. "Clear the air." "You could have written. I wasn't sure you'd read it." She tilted her head. "And now that you see me, are you sure I'll listen?" He ignored that, moved toward the small reading nook. "This place is nice. Quiet." "That's the idea." He sat on the armrest of an old velvet chair, not fully settled, like someone unsure of their welcome. "I've been thinking," he began, "a lot, about everything, about what happened." She watched him. He continued, carefully measured Vanessa and I. "We didn't mean to hurt you. Things were said. Out of context. People vent, say stupid things. You know how it is." Grace walked around the counter slowly, each step deliberate. "Is that what it was? Out of context." He tried again. "What I mean is we've made mistakes. I've made mistakes. I should have been more grateful, more present." Her eyes narrowed. "More present or more cautious?" Daniel's smile faltered. "I'm trying here." "No," she said softly, "you're performing." That stopped him. He exhaled sharply. "Jesus, Mom." She walked past him toward the window. The river was rolling lazily under the bridge outside, unbothered by either of them. "I listened to you for years," she said. "Every request, every excuse, every assumption, and I did it all thinking it came from love. But now I see it wasn't love, it was convenience." He stood. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" she asked, still facing the window. "You built your life on the assumption that I would never say no, that I would always pay, always support, always nod and smile and disappear into the background. You saw me not as a person, but as a structure, like a pillar holding up your house." He stepped closer. "I came all this way to fix this." "No," she turned to face him. "You came all this way to see if the damage could be undone. You came to see if the will could be changed back, if the house could still be yours, if there's anything left to gain." "That's not true," he said, voice rising. "Then why didn't you come sooner?" she asked. "Why didn't you come before the bank accounts closed, before the title transfer, before the lawyer's stamp dried?" Daniel's face tightened. She stepped toward him. "You waited until it affected you, until it was inconvenient. That's not remorse. That's desperation." He opened his mouth, but she kept going. "Do you remember what Vanessa said the night I left?" she asked. Daniel blinked. "You heard that?" "All of it." Silence dropped like a curtain between them. Grace's voice was quieter now, but steel-cut. "You waited me out. You planned for my death like it was a tax strategy." His hands balled into fists. "That's not what we meant." "You may not have meant it," she said, "but you lived it." He stepped back, shaking his head. "We're family. You can't just throw that away." She nodded slowly. "That's exactly the point. Family isn't a contract. It's not a return on investment. It's not a silent agreement that I fund your life and you ignore mine." He looked at her like he didn't recognize her. "You're not the same." "No," she said, "for the first time in my life, I'm not." The storm outside broke with a distant clap of thunder. Daniel's eyes darkened. "So that's it. You're just done." "I was done the moment you started counting down my death." He flinched. "I'm not coming back, Daniel." He stepped forward now, voice lowering, colder. "This isn't over." Grace didn't move. "It is for me." "You'll regret this," he said, his voice edged with something sharp. "One day you'll be alone. You'll miss us. You'll wish you hadn't burned it all down." Grace didn't blink. "If this is what fire feels like, I'll take it over silence." He turned, almost tripping over the rug as he stormed toward the door. When the bell rang above his head, it sounded like the strike of a gavel. She didn't watch him leave. She stood still, rooted. The shop was silent again, but it wasn't empty. She walked to the back, poured herself a cup of tea with trembling hands, and sat in the old chair Daniel had refused to settle into. She whispered to no one in particular that was the last time, and she meant it. The storm didn't arrive with warning this time. It broke through the calm like glass shattering on tile. It was a bright Saturday morning in Willow Bay. The air was thick with late spring heat. Grace had just opened the paper lantern, her bookstore smelling faintly of mint tea and worn paper. A small group of tourists had trickled in, flipping through the shelves, murmuring over books about local legends and maritime poetry. It was by all accounts a quiet day, until it wasn't. The bell above the door rang sharp and urgent. Grace looked up from behind the counter and felt the breath catch in her throat. Vanessa, perfectly composed, dressed in a cream pantsuit, too stiff for a beach town. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks. Flanking her were two men, one with a briefcase, the other holding a camera, red light blinking. The cameraman was already filming. Grace froze. "Grace Layton," Vanessa said loudly, her voice rehearsed. "We're here to formally document your refusal to sign the amendment to your estate directive." Customers turned confused. Grace stood slowly. "You need to leave." "On the contrary," Vanessa said, stepping forward. "This is public property. You're operating a business. There is no legal expectation of privacy here." The man with the briefcase stepped forward. "Mrs. Layton, my name is Edward Tillsbury. I represent the interests of your immediate family, namely, your son and his wife. We're requesting on record that you reconsider your recent transfer of estate assets and reinstate the Layton family as rightful beneficiaries." "This isn't a courtroom," Grace said, steady but quiet. "It doesn't need to be," Vanessa replied, smiling at the camera. "We just want your response. On film." "I said," Grace began. "What's going on here?" a voice interrupted from the back. Ethan appeared from the storeroom, wiping his hands on a towel, eyes narrowing when he saw Vanessa. "Who are you?" he asked, stepping between them and Grace. "Excuse me," Vanessa said, annoyed. "This doesn't concern you." "It does if you're harassing her," Ethan said, planting himself in front of Grace. Vanessa's lawyer tried to interject, but Ethan didn't flinch. "Turn the camera off," he said to the videographer. The man hesitated. "We were told she's 70. This is her property. You're trespassing." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Let's not get dramatic." And then she stepped forward, reaching into her purse. "I have papers," she said. "Legal documents. She just needs to sign them. A signature and we'll be gone." She pulled out a clipboard and stepped toward Grace. Ethan moved to block her, and that's when it happened. The camera shifted. Someone's shoulder bumped a bookshelf. Vanessa shoved forward, her hand brushing past Ethan's arm to thrust the clipboard at Grace. Grace stepped back, tripped on the corner of the rug, and fell hard, her back striking the corner of a low shelf. The bookstore went silent. "Mom," Ethan cried, crouching beside her. Grace grimaced, trying to sit up. Someone outside must have seen something, because within minutes, 2 uniformed officers arrived at the door. "What's going on?" one of them asked sharply. "She fell," Vanessa said quickly. "It was an accident. She got emotional." The other officer knelt beside Grace. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Grace's hand trembled as she tried to push herself up. "They forced their way in. They wouldn't stop filming. I told them to leave." "She assaulted me," Vanessa said quickly, pointing at Ethan. "He got in my face. He's not even her family." Ethan stood, fists clenched. "I was protecting her." The officers looked at each other, then separated everyone into corners. Over the next 30 minutes, questions flew. Identification was checked. Witnesses gave statements. The tourists, stunned and unsure, left quietly, some whispering, some filming on their phones. By the time the officers escorted Vanessa, her lawyer, and the cameraman outside, the whispers had begun. Later that day, Grace sat on the exam bed at the local clinic, a bruise blooming along her spine, the doctor gently applying ice. "She'll be fine," the doctor said to Ethan. "No fractures, just bruising." Ethan exhaled, nodding. "Thank you," Grace whispered. "Don't thank me," Ethan said. "That was assault." And the law agreed. The very next day, Vanessa was served a notice of investigation. Unlawful entry coercion, attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and public disturbance. The footage filmed by her own cameraman ironically served as the most damning evidence. The story hit local news by Tuesday. By Thursday, it went national. Real estate mogul storms elderly mother-in-law's bookstore in inheritance dispute. Vanessa's image-tight smile clipboard in hand circulated with venomous speed. Her brokerage suspended her license pending inquiry. A high-profile development deal one she'd spent a year building was pulled overnight. Clients fled. And Daniel, the state audit board launched an ethics review after his connection to a potential financial coercion case surfaced. He was placed on administrative leave. In a week, everything they'd built, the prestige, the partnerships, the illusion collapsed like wet cardboard. Back in Willow Bay, Grace returned to her shop 2 days later, bruised but unbroken. The townspeople greeted her with quiet nods, firm handshakes. The mayor stopped by with a bouquet. The coffee shop across the street left a thermos of herbal tea at her door. Even the neighborhood paper ran a front-page op-ed titled, "We Stand with Grace." But Grace didn't celebrate. She sat in the back room that night alone, lights dimmed. Ethan found her there. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "They came for the money," she said. "But it's what they took for granted that hurt more." Ethan didn't speak. He just sat beside her. And together they let the silence stretch, not empty this time, but full of something stronger. Boundaries, dignity, and the quiet power of a woman who had finally refused to be erased. The sun filtered gently through the gauze curtains, casting a honey-colored warmth across the small living room of Grace's cottage. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus oil and jasmine. Ethan had placed a diffuser near her bedside, after noticing the bruising made it harder for her to sleep. Grace sat in a recliner, a patchwork blanket over her legs, her arm resting in a cushioned sling. The physical pain from her fall was fading, but the emotional toll lingered like an ache beneath the surface. And yet this room, this town, this life still felt more like home than the mansion in Ashridge Hills ever did. Across from her, Ethan was pouring 2 mugs of tea with his usual careful hands. Everything he did thoughtfully measured, gentle, always checking if she was okay without asking outright. She found it touching. No one had anticipated her needs like that in years, not out of duty but instinct. He brought the cup to her with a quiet smile, sat down nearby, and took a sip of his own. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It had grown familiar, comforting. "How's the shoulder?" he asked. Grace gave a dry smile. "Stubborn like the rest of me." He chuckled. "At least you're consistent." They sat for a while, the only sound being the rhythmic tick of the wall clock and the distant chatter of riverbirds outside the window. Then Ethan spoke softly, cautiously. "Can I tell you something I don't usually talk about?" Grace turned to him. "Of course." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if the words were painted there. "I grew up in the foster system. Bounced around until I was 16. Some homes were fine, some were not." Grace's chest tightened. "I remember one Christmas," Ethan continued. "I was about 8. The family had 3 kids of their own. I was just the extra. They didn't mean to be cruel, but I could tell they just wanted the check. I didn't get a single gift, not even a card. They said Santa forgot because I hadn't filled out the right form." Grace's fingers clenched around her teacup. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head. "It's okay. That's not what I remember most. What stuck with me was the next house, Mrs. Kinley. She was 62, lived alone, drove a beat-up station wagon. Didn't have much, but every morning she made me oatmeal, with cinnamon. Said it reminded her of her grandmother." He smiled almost to himself. "That was the first time I felt like someone wanted me there. Just me. Not for money, not for a favor, just because." Grace swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight. Ethan looked at her softer now. "You remind me of her, only more fierce." She laughed gently, blinking back unexpected tears. "That's a first." He reached across the small table, set his hand lightly over hers. "You opened this bookstore. You built a new life. You gave up everything and didn't flinch. That's not weakness. That's legacy." Grace looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You know, I used to think legacy meant bloodlines, that who you raise is determined by who you birth, that inheritance followed names on birth certificates." She paused, voice trembling slightly. "But that's not true, is it?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Grace reached for her notebook, kept always within reach, and opened to a blank page. Slowly, carefully, she wrote something across the top, then turned it so he could read. Amendment to Beneficiary Directive, Hopewell Scholars Fund. Ethan stared. What is this? I'm adding your name, she said, voice calm. As the legal successor, the fund will continue under your stewardship. You'll expand it, improve it, make sure it finds more kids like you. He blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. Grace, you don't have to. I want to, she interrupted gently. And I'm not done. She pulled out another sheet of paper, this one already half completed. A legal guardianship application. I want to adopt you, Ethan. Legally, if you'll let me. His lips parted in stunned silence. I know you're not a child. I know it's late. But it's never too late to say, you belong here. You're my son. Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. Ethan wiped a tear away with the back of his hand, nodding wordlessly. Grace reached over and hugged him, awkward, one arm gentle. And in that small, sun-warmed room, something permanent took root. Family. Chosen. Built. Earned. A few days later, they walked together to the local notary office, signed the paperwork, shared a modest lunch afterward, laughing over homemade sandwiches and stories from Ethan's high school years. Later that week, the Hopewell Scholars Foundation received the update. New successor trustee, Ethan Harper Layton. It made headlines in education circles. Quiet ones, the kind she liked. But Grace didn't care about press anymore. What mattered was this. Her legacy would not be measured by square footage, but by lives changed. And this time it started with her own. The real estate sign went up on a Thursday afternoon, hammered into the front lawn of the Ashridge Hills mansion like a public admission of failure. It had been 8 months since Grace disappeared. 5 since Vanessa's license was suspended. 3 since Daniel's ethics board hearing had left him in limbo, neither cleared nor condemned. The silence of purgatory, it turned out, was worse than judgment. They tried to hold on. Pitched refinancing plans, applied for bridge loans, begged a few remaining friends for introductions and second chances. But the money didn't come. The reputation couldn't be salvaged. And eventually the walls of privilege they'd grown so comfortable behind began to crack, then crumble, then collapse entirely. When the offer came for the house millions below its original value, they took it without negotiation. By the time the movers arrived, Vanessa was too exhausted to protest the smaller apartment. One story, no view, no doorman. Daniel hired a separate crew to handle his things. They weren't speaking much anymore. That night in the unfamiliar rental with beige walls and plastic blinds, Daniel unpacked a box labeled office. At the very bottom, wedged between old paperweights and forgotten awards, he found the letter, the one his mother had left, the one he had read once angrily, dismissively, and then stuffed away like a receipt he didn't want to look at. Now in this place that didn't smell like home under a ceiling that wasn't his, Daniel opened it again. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I've chosen peace over performance. I loved you before you had a name. I believed in you before you had proof. And I gave without condition because that is what mothers do. But love cannot survive where it is only consumed. I needed to be more than useful. I needed to be seen. If all I was to you was a name on a deed, let this be the end of the contract. And let your silence be your inheritance. Mom. He didn't cry at first. Just sat there, numb fingers tracing the edges of the page. But then it hit him, not the words, but what wasn't there. There was no anger, no hatred. Just a clean goodbye, and somehow that was worse. The tears came suddenly, violently, years of buried guilt surfacing all at once. He wept into his hands, shoulders shaking, the sounds echoing in the hollow apartment. It wasn't grief for what he'd lost. It was grief for what he'd never appreciated, miles away in a town where the air smelled of paper and salt. Grace stood at the front desk of the Hopewell Scholars office reviewing scholarship files. She was stronger now, still limping slightly from her fall, but surer in her step, her voice, her presence. Ethan sat across the room, headphones on, reviewing new applicant videos. The doorbell rang. Grace looked up. A boy stood there, well, not quite a boy. 17, maybe 18. Tall, wiry, in a hoodie too big for him, holding a backpack slung over one shoulder. Toby, he said when she asked his name. Her eyes narrowed. Toby. Layton. He nodded, eyes downcast. My parents don't know I'm here. She folded her arms. Then why are you? Toby shifted awkwardly. I found your address online. I figured you might slam the door, but I had to try. Grace said nothing. He stepped inside slowly, looking around the office. You really built all this? Yes. He nodded, then swallowed. I don't want anything. Not money, not a car, not the house. I just want to understand. Understand what? Why you left. Why you cut us off. Why everything fell apart. Grace looked at him for a long moment. Your father never told you. He did, Toby said quietly. But I wanted to hear it from someone who wasn't trying to win. Grace walked to a chair, sat down. And what do you think happened? Toby hesitated. I think my dad forgot you were a person. I think my mom treated you like an obstacle. And I think I went along with it because I didn't know better. And now I think I do, he said. I've been volunteering with a literacy program. One of the kids recognized your photo from the news and said, that lady saved my big brother's life. Grace's eyes softened. I want to be better, Toby whispered. I want to be useful, and I don't care if I ever inherit a single dollar. Grace stood slowly, walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder. You remind me of someone, she said. Who? Myself, she replied, before I forgot what mattered. He looked up at her. Does that mean you'll give me a chance? She nodded. You can intern here. You'll start at the bottom. Filing, emails, reading applications. He smiled. Deal. But she added, her voice firm. You're not here to earn back an inheritance. There are no promises. Toby nodded. I'm not here for that. She turned to Ethan. Find him a desk. Toby looked between them. So, I get to stay. Grace smiled faintly. You get to begin. And in that moment a bridge began to rebuild, not from wealth, not from obligation, but from something much rarer. Humility, effort, and the quiet courage to change. The morning light spilled across the red-tiled courtyard of the Dalat Community School, painting the stone benches in soft gold and bathing the children in warmth as they hurried toward the assembly hall, their voices like birdsong in the highland breeze. Grace stood near the stage entrance, watching the preparations unfold from behind a modest curtain. Her breath caught as she surveyed the moment she had never known she was working toward a space filled not with luxury, but legacy. Rows of students in pressed white shirts and navy skirts, teachers in iodide donors scattered among them, parents where there were parents, and hopeful eyes where there were none. She had returned to Dalat not to revisit the past, but to rewrite it. Hung was standing at the podium, already flipping through the speech he had written the night before, smoothing the pages for the fourth time. He wore a fitted navy suit, new, but not flashy, with a pin on his lapel, bearing the Hopewell Scholars Foundation crest. He looked grown, grounded, but most of all proud. Beside him, Toby was adjusting the projector, his lanky frame bent with a concentration that had once been reserved only for video games and apathy. He looked older too, not in years but in purpose. A scholarship banner hung overhead in sweeping white Hopewell for those who dare to begin. Grace stepped out into the sun. There was a brief hush in the crowd as people noticed her. Some rose. Others simply leaned forward, watching the woman who had once disappeared and now stood brighter than ever. Hung's eyes met hers. He smiled, a real one, grounded in something unshakable. He tapped the mic gently. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's an honor to welcome you to this year's Hopewell Scholars Grant Ceremony. But before we announce the recipient, I want to share a story. The room quieted utterly still. 10 years ago, I was just another kid with a number in a file. No name anyone remembered. No money. No home. But someone believed in me before I even knew what I was capable of. She didn't need to. She had nothing to gain. But she did it anyway. He paused, swallowing back emotion. And today, because of her, we get to pay that belief forward. He glanced at Grace. She taught me that love isn't about blood. It's about presence. It's about choosing someone even when the world says you don't have to. That woman is my mother. His voice didn't falter. Mom, would you join me on stage? A collective hush. Then Grace stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling not from nerves but from the weight of something holy. As she reached him, Hung turned to her, fully kissed her on the cheek, and before hundreds of eyes whispered, "Thank you, Mom." She didn't expect the tears, but they came anyway, warm and full. The auditorium erupted in soft applause, not the kind for a donor or a guest speaker, but for something deeper, something earned. She took the mic with the hand that steadied itself the moment her fingers touched its metal frame. "Good morning," she began, voice quiet, clear. "My name is Grace Layton, but today I'm here simply as a mother." She turned toward the side of the stage. "Will Lynn step forward, please?" A hush fell again. From the second row, a small girl no more than 10 rose slowly. Her school uniform was 2 sizes too big. Her shoes were worn thin at the heel, but her back was straight, her steps sure. She walked toward the stage with the stillness of someone used to silence. An orphan, alone, and yet not broken. Grace knelt gently as Lynn approached. The girl's eyes met hers. "I knew someone like you once," Grace whispered. "She lost everything, but she grew up, and she found a way to give it all back." She took Lynn's hands. "I believe you'll do the same." The child nodded just once, and in that moment Grace saw herself again. The version of her that never asked to be strong but became strong anyway. She handed the certificate to Lynn. The applause rose again, soft but sustained. Later after the ceremony, Grace wandered outside. The sun was high now, casting a golden halo over the tiled schoolyard. Children laughed, chasing each other between jacaranda trees in full bloom. The air smelled of chalk dust, fresh paper, and possibility. Ethan stood at a distance speaking with a reporter. Toby was helping the staff carry chairs back to the truck, sleeves rolled, cheeks flushed. Grace took a breath, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like she was holding something together. She just felt held. She turned slowly, stepping to the middle of the courtyard. The light hit her face soft and unwavering. Her eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened they were bright, not with pride or vindication, but peace. She had no mansion, no headlines, no heirs begging for forgiveness, but she had a son, and a second chance, and a name that now meant something, because it had been chosen, not inherited. As the last note of wind rustled through the courtyard trees, Grace smiled, not because of what she had been given, but because finally she was exactly the kind of mother she had always wanted to be.